We talked a lot about dealing with your mental formations, your mental states, and that is very central to the practice, is how you deal with your mental phenomena. One principle very important is that you are ultimately responsible for your own mental states. But of course, it's obvious that our mental condition, our mental states, is at least in part a reflection of phenomena in the outer world, conditions around us, reactions of other people, and so on. So we have to take that into account. And external phenomena are infinitely varied and always changing. One day you can be sitting in Manhattan eating a bowl of Italian ice, and a few days later you're involved in a backwoods engineering project moving an outhouse. And things, changing, external phenomena changing very rapidly. We do in our tradition, in most Buddhist traditions, there is an emphasis on meditation and going into seclusion, doing retreats, or even just a daily practice. You're going into seclusion for a period of time. You find a quiet place. So you're at that time undertaking a somewhat artificial exercise. You're simplifying as much as humanly possible the external conditions. You set things up, you deliberately choose to do your practice in a quiet place and avoid distractions. And you simplify your physical basis by, sitting still with your eyes closed. You're reducing the amount of sensory input you have to deal with. And this very useful exercise, it's, as I say, an artificial exercise. You're deliberately creating an artificially as close to an ideal condition as possible for observing the mental states. But it's not possible to live in that kind of conditions forever. And if you are only able to be peaceful and mindful and equanimous in those kind of conditions, then it's not of very much value. You have to be able to take that inner peace and centeredness and take it out into all kinds of conditions, pleasant and unpleasant and otherwise. No, there is I'm sure everybody's familiar with it. There's quite famous a Christian prayer that goes, may I have the what is it, the patience to endure that which I cannot change, the courage to change that which I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Uh, that's a very good, basic summary for dealing with conditions. There's no particular benefit to be gained from imposing suffering and misery on yourself. If it's possible to change the external conditions to make things more comfortable and easier, it's sensible to do so. But at the same time, we have to have the patient endurance to endure those conditions we cannot change. There's plenty in the human life that we just have to put up with, and we have to learn to deal with it. And it is important also to have the wisdom to know the difference. It's very often when things are going in a less than ideal pattern, there's an impulse in the mind to want to change things, to want to fiddle, to do something. And it's often the case there's nothing you can do. And any intervention would only make matters worse. So you have to have the wisdom to know that just being present with it is all you can do. It's like when I was a junior monk in Thailand, we had behind the sala, we had a area we'd go to wash our bowls. It was like a little clearing with a water jug and the stands to put our bowls and soap, and it's all set up for bowl washing. And we'd go there every day after the meal and clean our bowls. And one day I was there with the other monks washing the bowls, and I saw to my left, just at the edge of the forest, there was a big viper, a poisonous snake, sitting coiled up. And I didn't do anything about it. I just kept an eye, just make sure, just watched him out of the corner of my eye to make sure he looked pretty placid. They come out to sun themselves in the clearing. But there was another one of the junior monks, younger than me. He saw the snake and he got in his head something had to be done about it. So he picked up a stick and started trying to chase it into the forest, and then poking at it, and it only riled it up, and it was thrashing around, and everybody got excited. It's like you just leave it alone and everything's okay. But have the impulse to do something about it when you see something's out of whack. There's our nice peaceful bowl washing area. There's a poison snake in the corner. I better do something about it. Oh no, you don't have to. That's very often in life. Just leave things be. If you poke at it with a stick, you'll only make it worse. It's a big part of practice is just endure the things that we can't change. It was Ajahn Chah's philosophy that the quality of patient endurance is, he has said on a number of occasions, he thinks that's the number one spiritual quality for making progress, is being able to have patient endurance. But as I began with, when you can do something about it, it's incumbent that you do. There's a story from Ajahn Chah that's well known, when he saw one of the kutis in the monastery. The roof was in disrepair. There was a big tear in the roof, and he went to see who was living in that kuti, and there was a monk in there sitting in the corner of the kuti with all his belongings pushed up against one wall, and everything was wet on the other side of the kuti. And Ajahn Chah asked him, "Why don't you fix the roof?" And he said, "I'm practicing patient endurance." And he said, "It's the patient endurance of a water buffalo." And this comes up sometimes in small practical way. People ask about moving in meditation. If you're uncomfortable, your legs hurting, and you should you move in meditation, and or is it better to sit still and endure the discomfort? And it's really impossible to put a hard and fast rule on that. It's, I think, a question of wisdom and middle path, right? You want to avoid the extreme of constantly fidgeting every time there's a little discomfort, and the other extreme is sitting rigidly and enduring agonizing pain when you could simply shift and be more comfortable and carry on with your meditation. I had one young fellow here who was always fidgeting in meditation constantly, and I talked to him about it, and I tried to get this kind of principle across, and he says, well, how many times in an hour should you move? I says, well, I can't really put a number on it, but he kept sort of on me, so I finally said, well, imagine, no more than 3 times. And then I watched him over the next like 2 weeks. In every meditation, he would move exactly 3 times. uh, then at the end of every meditation, when the bell rang, he would be like he'd uncoil his legs like it was a spring going off. There is inherent suffering and dukkha in the human body, and there is something to be learnt from just sitting still. Some of the pains that particularly beginning meditators feel is just not being used to sitting still, because we escape from our dukkha by fidgeting. In ordinary life, you're sitting in your easy chair at home, watching TV or reading a book. You're changing your posture. If you would, you're not even fully conscious of it, but if you would really watch yourself or watch somebody else, unless they're asleep, they're changing their posture every few minutes a little bit. Just shift your weight from one hip to the other, or move your elbow to the up and down the arm of the chair. And this is the way we disguise the inherent dukkha of the human body. The reality is, this is a human body. It's always going to hurt to some degree. It's a constant dukkha. And people get past the point of where pain is an issue in meditation. It's not because they become so easy with their sitting. Their posture becomes, it does to some degree, the posture improves and they learn to sit properly. But the bigger factor is they just get to the point where they don't let the pain bother them. They don't just, that's just that sensation. Of course, one of the biggest complications, often the most difficult things to deal with in the outer world, are other beings, other people. And this is where wisdom, first of all, is always important at all times. But this is where the Brahma Viharas, compassion, particularly comes in. They have compassion for other people's imperfections. That nobody is, unless you're a Buddha or an Arahant, nobody is without defilement, and people are going to be acting unskillfully and wrong-headedly at times. You have to first of all have compassion for yourself. That's very important. It always needs to be said when you're talking about compassion, is to remember to have compassion for yourself. So you don't you don't just tolerate other people abusing you, but you should try and react skillfully, which means not giving in to anger, not coming from a place of anger, but you can come from a place of firmness and self-protection and recognition of your own value and your space, but it doesn't have to be fired by anger, which means that it'll fire conflict, and anger will come back at you and things will be worse. One reflection is that if someone is acting very badly, then they're object of compassion because they're making very bad karma for themselves, and they're going to suffer the results of that karma. This is the Brahmavihara of equanimity. The traditional contemplation is that all beings are subject of their karma, heirs to their karma, born of their karma, abide supported by their karma. So we're all, every one of us, experiencing the results of our karma. That wherever we are, whatever kind of a situation, whatever kind of a body, whatever kind of external relations we have, this is all part of the net of our karma. And we can't do anything about our past karma. That's already done. We're just experiencing the results. But we can make new karma going forward. And we have that power, that choice. In every moment, we're making fresh karma. And we can make it for good or for ill. The easy thing is not to exercise that, is just to go along the groove of habit formation. Just carry on the way we have before. This is habitual karma. We dig a rut and follow it. This isn't always a bad thing. You can also make it a good thing. You can establish good habits. Like if you have a habit of meditating every day at a certain time, and you do that, there's one advantage of doing it at a fixed time every day, is that you set up a habit and becomes habituated. And it's a wholesome habit. So it's not a struggle to do it. It's just something you do every day. And that's the same with any kind of wholesome behavior, exercise or any kind of good behavior or healthy affirmative behavior can become a habit as easily as negative behavior. Another way of looking at this topic, it's always important to remember the goal of the Buddhist path is the realization of the unconditioned. That this conditioned realm is to be transcended. And it's not to be, the goal of the path is not to perfect or to reconcile this conditioned realm. And that's not to be forgotten. But on a conventional plane, an ordinary day-to-day existence, we have to live in and deal with this samsaric reality. This is where we are presently. So it can't be ignored or neglected. And the Buddha talked about the levels of reality and levels of truth. The conventional right view and transcendental right view. Conventional right view is defined in several places in the Pali Canon as it's all to do with conditions in the samsaric existence. It's karma and fruits of karma, this world and the other world, fruit of good and evil deeds, and so on. It's all in that, that realm of how we live and the karma that we make and the results we experience. Transcendental right view is the Four Noble Truths and realizing that there is an end to suffering, realizing that there is unconditioned, there is nibbana. That's a higher truth. But it doesn't negate the other. There's two levels of looking at things. So we have to deal with this conventional level of truth. We can't ignore it. Even as our ultimate destination should be transcending it altogether, we still have to negotiate it for some indeterminate time, maybe several more lifetimes, maybe many more lifetimes. There's a Zen story about two monks who go to see the master, and they ask him. The first one asks the master, "How many more lifetimes until I become fully enlightened?" And the master said, "Oh, in your case, I think 500 lifetimes." And he goes away all dejected and sad. And the second monk comes up and asks, "How many more lifetimes before I be fully enlightened?" And the master says, "In your case, I think you'll do it in just 500 lifetimes." And the guy's all delighted. 500, only 500 more. This is wonderful. And it actually does, it does help dealing with life's vicissitudes, sometimes to take the big picture, to think in terms of many lifetimes. Like, how much is this going to matter? And there's this thing that seems like such a big drama right now. How much is this going to matter in 100 years or 500 years? The only thing that really matters in the long term is the karma and the paramis you make now, that you're establishing good ground for the future. It's important to avoid as much as possible getting caught up in the eight worldly dhammas. They These are the ups and downs of the world that can, if you give in, give into them, they can dominate the mind and throw you on a roller coaster of extreme emotions, pain and pleasure, gain and loss, fame and dishonor, praise and blame. And this is a set of eight dhammas that we get caught in very easily. Uh, in time of the previous Buddha, in Kassapa Buddha's time, there was an incident that's told that Mara was trying to throw the monks off their practice and disrupt Kassapa's dispensation. And when the monks went into the village for alms round, Mara possessed the mind of the villagers and had them abuse and defile the monks, and call them names, and shaven-headed beggars and worthless characters, coming around here and wasting our time and we want to be fed for nothing. And the Kassapa Buddha had the monks then do loving kindness meditation to keep them from falling into animosity based on the blame. And so Mara saw this wasn't working. He tried the opposite tack, and when the monks went into the next village, he had the villagers bestow excessive praise on them. What wonderful holy men gracing our village. We're so honored. It's so marvelous. And just on and on with this excessive praise. And Kassapa Buddha had the monks do a Subha meditation on the foulness of the body to keep them from falling into elation. Uh, and this is praise and blame, right? This is you get praised for something you've done, or you feel all happy and overjoyed, and then somebody criticizes you and you're down in the dumps. Should be just try to maintain an even keel with all these dhammas. There's a story from in one of the Taoist texts about the farmer who in a storm the gate of his yard breaks and the horse escapes. His horse escapes, and his neighbors say, "Oh, what a tragedy! You've lost your horse. So what a great loss." And he says, "Ah, maybe good, maybe bad." And then a few days later, the horse comes back bringing another horse with it. And everybody says, "Oh, this is so marvelous. You got two horses." And he says, "Ah, maybe good, maybe bad." And then his teenage son is trying to train the horse, and the horse throws him, and he breaks his leg. And everybody's commiserating. "Oh, your son broke his leg. What a tragedy!" And he's, "Ah, maybe good, maybe bad." And then the next day, the king's men come around, recruiting, drafting young men to go off in the army. And because this guy's got a broken leg, he doesn't have to go. So it's just, the ups and downs. You can't let yourself be thrown into elation at something that seems good, or dejection at something that's bad. You just try and maintain an even keel and deal with things as they come along. And the wisdom factor is very important, is to remember always that everything you encounter in samsaric existence is going to be imperfect, impermanent, and dependently arisen, and ultimately insubstantial. And if you understand these principles, it actually makes life more, not only easier, but more pleasant in many respects. Because one kind of little hidden benefit, a little gem in the teachings that's often not noticed easily, is that when you recognize impermanence and imperfection of things, that frees you to really enjoy the pleasant moments that occur in life. When something pleasant happens, you can fully be present with it and enjoy it, and not poison it by expecting it to last, or expecting it to be perfect. It's just as it is. This is a pleasant moment, so just experience it as a pleasant moment. There's no experience in samsara that is perfect, and none that are abiding. They'll come and go. In some Buddhist cultures, they recognize this principle very well, and they actually use it. They think of the Japanese cherry blossom festival. The cherry blossoms exquisitely beautiful when the trees bloom, but it's only for a day or two. And it's part of the poignancy of the experience, is that this is just today, and then tomorrow they're all withered and gone. I also have seen photographs of, in China, they have, in northern China, where the climate is cold, they have festivals where they make ice sculptures. And some of these ice sculptures are very elaborate. And, they know it's not like you're making something out of marble to last for millennia. This is going to melt in a month, right, and be gone. But they enjoy it just as an ephemeral experience. You watch for yourself. When you are enjoying something good, that you don't let the mind be poisoned at that moment by anticipating its loss and feeling regret. Too bad this can't last forever. Well, it's not going to last forever. It's just this moment, and this moment might be quite pleasant, and enjoy it. Conversely, understanding these principles helps with the unpleasant, painful experiences, because they're going to terminate, they're going to end. Even a painful disease is going to come to an end. Either you get better or you die, but either way, that that particular pain is over with. And this is something else to watch. The way the mind works is that when you are enduring something painful, that you might think in your mind, this is unendurable. I can't take this. But if you examine it, it is perfectly. It doesn't matter how bad it is. It's perfectly endurable for this moment. But what makes it seem unendurable is you project ahead, and you're thinking of it lasting for minutes or hours or days, and that you can't bear that. So staying in the present moment, you can bear anything. The present moment is just as it is. Then there's the saying that I have found extremely valuable over the years is, if you can't get out of it, get into it. If you are, as everyone is from time to time in the course of their daily life, your duties require you to do something you don't enjoy, that you have to take on some task or chore that doesn't seem pleasant. The best way to get through it is to get into it. Throw yourself into it and do it best you can, and with the most engagement. People often attempt to mentally avoid those unpleasant things by running off. They're doing one thing with the body, but they're letting the mind run off someplace else. And that means that whatever you're doing is not going to be done well. It's going to be done in a half-hearted way and end up being poorly done and probably take you longer, and it's going to be more unpleasant than it needs to be. But if you take an interest in it, you might find you learn to enjoy it, and and in any case, it will be done well, and it will be done more efficiently and quickly. So it comes down, in the end, we're talking about dealing with external conditions, but it comes down always in the end, ultimately, to the internal conditions. Your internal reflection of the outer world is what you're, in the end, left with, and which you're ultimately responsible for, and that's entirely your own responsibility. It's very counterproductive to blame the arising of defilements on other people or on external conditions. If only things were easier, I'd be more peaceful, or he makes me so angry I can't help it. This doesn't serve any valuable purpose. Just evading the what ends up being ultimately your final responsibility is your own reaction, your own mental states. That's something you have to take responsibility for. And you're not always going to have perfect conditions. It's wise and sensible to try and improve your conditions as much as you can, but there's a limit to that. And you're going to have to deal with less than ideal conditions for practice and for your life and for your experiences. You have to try and find a way of being with that allows the mind to be free, unfettered, calm, and awake. Some of the Tibetan lamas are very impressive in this regard. The hardships they were put through by the communist Chinese, particularly in the early days of the Chinese takeover. There was one story about one of these fellows who was held in a Chinese prison for a long time and tortured. And the interviewer asked him, this was in a magazine he was being interviewed, and the interviewer asked him, were you ever afraid? He says, oh yes, I was afraid. He says, I was afraid that I would lose my mental calm and cease to have compassion for the Chinese guards. His dealing with those external circumstances, very extreme circumstances that probably none of us will ever, hopefully ever experience such extremes, that he put primary emphasis on maintaining his own mental equilibrium and his feeling of compassion. And the Buddha said in one of the suttas, he sets a very high standard for this. He said, if you're seized by bandits and they're sawing off your arms and legs one by one with a two-handed saw, if you allow one moment of ill will to arise in your mind, you are not following my teachings. And this references back to a Jataka story where the Bodhisattva was a prince, and while he was a small child, his father was the king, was mad. He was a mad tyrant, and he was convinced this boy would grow up to overthrow him and seize his throne. So he ordered the boy killed as a child, and he had the executioner come in and cut the boy to pieces with his sword. And this was the lifetime in which he perfected the parami of metta, of loving kindness. It said that while he was being hacked to pieces by the executioner, and there were 4 people in the room. There was his tyrannical father, there was the executioner, there was his mother, the queen, pleading and begging for mercy and to spare her child, and there was himself. And he said that he had the same feeling of loving kindness towards all 4. He made no distinction between the 4.